Before we start, let me warn you, sometimes the biggest battles are fought not in boardrooms or battlefields, but in the quiet glances exchanged when no one else is looking. This isn't just a story of love and betrayal. It's the fight for a legacy. Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. When you've lived through as much as I have, fought through dirt, poverty, and betrayal, you learn to trust your instincts, even the quiet ones that creep up your spine like a cold whisper. I felt it the second Matthew told me. "Grandma, I'm getting married," he said, his face glowing the way only a 22-year-old can glow after 2 months of whirlwind romance. He was my heart, that boy, always had been. And even as I smiled, something inside me twisted, something deep, something old. Brianna Carlisle. A pretty name, a pretty face, but life has taught me that pretty often comes with a price. Still, I bit my tongue. I smiled. I congratulated him. What else could I do? When you love someone, sometimes you let them learn the hard way. Sometimes it's the only way. The wedding rehearsal was held at the estate, of course. Our home, the symbol of everything I built with bloody hands and sleepless nights. A place where I made damn sure the floors were polished enough to see your reflection. Where the walls told stories of triumph and survival. I stood there, next to Matthew, watching guests arrive in their polished shoes and rented smiles. And then she walked in. Brianna Carlisle. Golden hair, perfect skin, the kind of beauty that turns heads and softens hearts. She smiled at me, wide and mechanical, like a doll wound up too tight. She offered her hand. I took it. It was cold, like touching marble. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, with a voice too sweet to be sincere. I smiled back, because that's what you do when you're Eleanor Whitmore. You smile while you sharpen your knives behind your back. She was polite, too polite. Every answer clipped short, every glance tinged with the faintest hint of impatience. I wasn't a person to her. I was an obstacle, something she had to tolerate until she could move past me. The rest of the family didn't notice. They never do at first. Linda, my daughter, fluttered around Brianna like a moth to a flame, desperate to make her feel welcome. Matthew, blind with love, didn't see the cracks, but I did. I saw everything. And then came Richard Carlisle. You could hear him before you saw him, booming laugh, words spilling out like a broken faucet. He rushed toward me like an old friend, grabbing my hand in both of his sweaty palms. "Eleanor, what a pleasure!" he bellowed, his teeth gleaming too white under the chandeliers. I smiled, frozen and unamused, as he talked about business ventures and amazing opportunities, and how he respected strong women like me. I'd met 100 Richards in my lifetime. Men who spoke loud to hide their empty pockets. Men who charmed the room while plotting to steal it. He reeked of desperation, cloaked in cheap cologne and fake bravado. And just like that, my instincts screamed again. But the night had one more gift for me before it ended. I saw them near the far corner of the ballroom, away from the noise, the laughter, the speeches. Brianna and a young man I didn't recognize. He wasn't just a guest. He wasn't just a friend. There was something electric between them. The way they stood too close, the way she laughed with her whole body, the way his hand grazed her waist with the kind of familiarity you don't build in 2 months. I watched them, unseen. Watched as Brianna's eyes lit up in a way they never did with Matthew. Watched as that boy, Dylan, they called him later, leaned in and she leaned right back as if pulled by gravity. No one else noticed. The music was too loud. The drinks were flowing too freely. But I saw it. Because when you fought for everything you have, when you've clawed your way out of hell, you learn to recognize a snake no matter how pretty its skin. I stood there, my hands folded neatly, my face a perfect mask of elegance. Inside, though, I made a silent vow. I would remember every glance, every whisper, every lie that smile tried to hide. Because storms don't announce themselves with thunder right away. Sometimes they creep in quietly. And this one had just begun. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a weight growing heavier on my chest. Everything was fast, too fast, and yet, somehow, nothing felt right. Matthew had come to me one evening, looking nervous. He sat on the edge of the couch in my study, twisting his fingers together. I knew it was something important, something bothering him. My boy, so full of life and optimism, had always been able to hide his worries behind a bright smile, but not this time. "Grandma, I need your help," he said, his voice faltering slightly. I set my book down, sensing the weight of his words. "What is it, Matthew?" He shifted in his seat. I bought Brianna's wedding dress, but I don't have enough money to pay for it all right now. I put it on the credit card, but I'm a little short. Could you lend me some money to cover the rest?" I could feel the hesitation in his words, and I understood. He wasn't asking for a loan. Not really. He was asking for me to save him from a decision he'd made in haste, and I knew this was coming. The dress, the wedding, everything about it had been rushed. 2 months. Just 2 months. No one takes a moment to think. No one stops to breathe. But I couldn't help him. Not this time. "No, Matthew," I said, my voice steady but firm. "A gift is not an obligation. Respect comes before money. You should have thought of that before you bought that dress." He blinked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean? It's for Brianna's dress, Grandma. The wedding." I cut him off. "I know what it's for, Matthew. But you should never spend money you don't have, especially not for someone who hasn't earned your trust." His face flushed with frustration, and for a moment, I saw the faintest glimpse of anger in his eyes. But he didn't argue. Not then. Instead, he stood up, and in a quiet voice, he said, "I'll figure it out, Grandma." And he left. It wasn't until the next morning that I learned the consequences of my decision. Linda came storming into my study, her face twisted with fury. "You had no right!" she spat, her voice sharp as a blade. "Matthew is doing what he thinks is best, and you—" She cut herself off, shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe you'd do this to him." I said nothing, watching her pace back and forth, the anger radiating from her. "Do you even care about him?" she demanded. "Or are you too busy pretending you have all the answers? You think that lecturing him is going to make him see your way? You're pushing him away, Eleanor." I felt the old ache in my chest, the pain of being misunderstood, but I couldn't bring myself to regret what I'd said. Matthew needed to learn. He needed to see that life wasn't just about rushing forward with promises and shiny dresses. It was about understanding the weight of those promises. Linda, in her anger, didn't see it. She was too busy playing the role of the protective mother, defending her precious son. And now she was too deep in her own hurt to see the truth. "Fine," Linda snapped. "I'll pay for it then. I'll take care of everything. But don't think for a second that this doesn't change things between us." And just like that, the rift widened. The lines were drawn. She paid for the dress that very day, paid it off in full, without a second thought. But I knew then that things would never be the same between us. You can't erase what's already been said, can you? Once you see someone's true nature, it doesn't go away. Matthew didn't talk to me about it again. He didn't ask for my advice or my approval. He simply let his mother handle it. He didn't realize what had been lost in the exchange. And Linda? She couldn't see past her anger long enough to realize that I wasn't trying to hurt her son. I was trying to teach him. The wedding loomed closer with each passing day, and I could feel the distance between me and the rest of them growing. Matthew, lost in his own world of wedding plans and Brianna's demands, didn't notice. But I did. And I knew something dark and quiet, that they didn't. There was more to Brianna's story than met the eye. I could feel it, deep in my bones. The signs were all around me. But for now, I stayed silent. Because sometimes, it's better to let them fall on their own before you make them see the truth. The day of the wedding arrived with all the fanfare one might expect for the Whitmore name. A grand event. A spectacle meant to be remembered. Flowers, food, laughter, everything wrapped in layers of luxury. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of Matthew's life. But beneath the glittering surface, the air was thick with tension. I stood in the corner of the room, watching as the guests gathered, their laughter floating over the sound of clinking champagne glasses. The ballroom shimmered with gold accents, the light soft and warm, just as it should be for such an important occasion. Yet something felt off. Brianna was a vision in her wedding dress, every inch of her crafted to perfection. Her beauty was undeniable, but her eyes never met mine. She looked past me as though I were invisible, or worse, as though I were a ghost from her past that she had no time for. I watched her move from one group of guests to another, her smile always tight, her words polite but lacking any true warmth. She almost seemed to avoid my gaze, and I didn't miss the coldness in her demeanor when she did glance my way, a flash of ice that disappeared as quickly as it came. The kind of ice that cuts straight through you, leaving you with a chill that lingered far longer than it should. Matthew stood beside her, a gleam in his eye that only a young man in love could have. I wanted to reach out and shake him, to make him see what I saw, but he was too deep in it, too blinded by the illusion of love to notice the cracks. Richard Carlyle, Brianna's father, was the picture of charm. His laugh was loud, his words fast and smooth, designed to fill any silence. He walked through the crowd like a king, grasping hands, shaking shoulders, and making promises to anyone who would listen about his great new ventures and amazing opportunities that were sure to make anyone wealthy. I could feel his desperation from across the room, the way he sought approval from anyone who might help him claw his way up the social ladder, the kind of man who could tell you anything and make you believe it with a smile, the kind of man I had learned to distrust long ago. But it wasn't just Richard that caught my eye that evening. No, it was Dylan. He stood with Brianna during most of the night, casually, as if he were meant to be there. His easy laughter and the way he leaned in just a bit too close when he spoke to her wasn't something you could miss if you were looking. And I was always looking. They shared quiet jokes, exchanged knowing looks, and moved as if they had always belonged to each other. Brianna's eyes softened when she looked at him, something I hadn't seen when she looked at Matthew. The affection in their eyes was unmistakable, and the way their bodies almost seemed to align naturally, like magnets, made my stomach twist. I watched them like a hawk, marking every small gesture, every touch that was just a beat too lingering, every laugh that went on a second too long. I wasn't the only one who saw it. I was sure of it. But no one dared to say anything. Not while everything was glittering so brightly. Not while Matthew was still lost in the haze of his wedding day. Not while Linda hovered nearby with her fake smile, blissfully ignorant of the crack in the foundation beneath their feet. As I stood there, I felt the weight of years of experience pressing down on me, reminding me of the lies I'd encountered in my life, the kind that always seemed perfect on the surface. But I had been burned too many times to let it go unnoticed. Dylan wasn't just a friend. He wasn't just a familiar face in the crowd. He was something else, something more dangerous, and I could see it clearly. The evening stretched on, and the formalities came and went. The speeches, the toasts, the forced joy. All of it was a performance, a game everyone was playing to keep up appearances. But I could see through it all. I recorded every detail, every subtle glance, every small inflection in voice that betrayed the calm surface. I would remember it all. Brianna's coldness, Richard's desperate smiles, Dylan's intimate proximity. I would remember because one day, sooner than they thought, everything they had built would come crashing down. And when it did, I'd be the one watching from the sidelines, calm as ever, knowing that I had seen it coming long before anyone else did. It's funny how life has a way of moving forward, even when you're stuck in the past. Matthew had barely been married for a few weeks when he sat me down, eyes wide with excitement, and started talking about his big break. "Grandma, I've got the perfect opportunity," he said, practically glowing. I tried to focus, listening as he spoke, but the voice inside my head, the one that never stopped warning me, was already starting to whisper. It wasn't even the tone of his voice or the sparkle in his eyes that bothered me. It was the way he said it, the way he believed it. Like every word was the gospel truth, like nothing could go wrong. "Richard Carlyle," he continued. "He's been teaching me about investments, and we're going to do this through fractal investments. It's a game changer, Grandma. I'm going to make some serious money." I nodded, letting him spill out his excitement, but inside, my stomach churned. Fractal investments. The name itself felt hollow to me, like something that had been designed to sound more impressive than it really was. Richard Carlyle, the smooth talker I'd seen at the wedding, was now guiding my grandson into a world I knew nothing about, and my gut told me it wasn't the path he thought it was. "Sounds interesting," I said, forcing my lips into a polite smile. "But tell me more about this opportunity," Matthew went on, detailing every little aspect of his plan, as if the very mention of the words business and investment had transformed him into a savvy professional. I listened, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in my chest. The whole thing felt too perfect. Richard Carlyle, a man with more flash than substance, suddenly becoming Matthew's mentor. A supposed opportunity to make money, when we both knew how quickly that world could swallow you whole. It was as if he had placed Matthew under his spell, making him believe that wealth and success could be snatched up with a single leap of faith. The more Matthew spoke, the more I realized how much he trusted Richard, how much he wanted to believe in this so-called opportunity. And I couldn't help but wonder, was this another one of Richard's schemes? Was this just another way for him to ingratiate himself with the Whitmore name, to slide his way into the family's pockets? Well, you know I've always trusted you. Matthew, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. But you should be careful. Sometimes the fastest way to success is the fastest way to disaster. He waved it off, like I was just another old woman trying to slow him down. You don't have to worry, Grandma. Richard's a genius when it comes to investments. I'm going to learn a lot, and we're going to build something big. I smiled again, but this time it wasn't a smile of encouragement. It was the kind of smile a person gives when they know something others don't. I had seen too many people like Richard in my life, the ones who promised you the moon while they were digging a hole underneath you. And Matthew, in his youthful optimism, was heading straight for that hole, completely unaware of the danger beneath his feet. All right, I said softly, but just remember, Matthew, not every opportunity is what it seems. I saw his eyes flicker with impatience, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stood up, ruffling my hair, as he always had when he was a little boy. I'll be fine, Grandma. Trust me. He left the room with that look of certainty still on his face, his dreams so big and his feet so light that I almost wished I could believe in them too. But I didn't. I couldn't. As the door clicked shut behind him, I sat there, feeling the weight of his words press down on me. I wasn't sure if it was Richard's influence or the dream of easy success that had clouded Matthew's judgment, but either way, I knew trouble was on the horizon. It always starts with something too good to be true, doesn't it? And this story? This opportunity Matthew was so excited about? It felt too perfect, and I had learned long ago that perfect was just another word for disaster waiting to happen. It's strange, the way people ignore the signs when they don't want to see them, the way they convince themselves that everything is fine when deep down, they know something isn't right. As the weeks passed, I watched Matthew's behavior shift slowly, like the tide creeping in, unnoticed until it's too late. He started selling off assets, those gifts I had given him over the years, things that had been meant to secure his future, to ensure that he would never have to struggle the way I did. At first, I thought it was just a momentary lapse, a misstep, but it wasn't. Grandma, I'm just reinvesting, he would say, his voice upbeat, his eyes bright with that same enthusiasm he'd had when he first told me about fractal investments. It's all part of the plan. These are just the new projects Richard's helping me with. I'm going to make it all back, and more. Every time he spoke like that, something inside me turned cold. The words were the same ones I had heard from too many people who'd lost everything, who had been seduced by someone promising them the world and leaving them with nothing but empty hands. The first time he sold a piece of property, a small investment I had given him for his 21st birthday, he tried to reassure me, but I could see it in his eyes. He was scared of failing, scared of disappointing Richard, and scared of me. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I wouldn't care. But I noticed, and I cared. One evening, after another of Matthew's "I'm just adjusting things" explanations, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with Linda, trying to make her understand what was happening, trying to get her to see the way Richard was pulling the strings, but she didn't want to hear it. "Eleanor, you're being ridiculous," she said, rolling her eyes in that way she always did when she thought I was being too harsh. "Matthew is grown now. He's making decisions for himself. You need to let him live his life." I sighed, rubbing my temples, trying to gather the patience I had so often lost when dealing with her. "Linda, I know my son-in-law, and I know Matthew. Richard Carlyle is using him. He's setting him up for something. He's a smooth talker, a con man, and you're too blind to see it." Her face flushed, and she crossed her arms defensively. "Don't you dare call Richard a con man, Eleanor. You don't know him like I do. Then what do you think this is? This selling off his assets? This reinvesting in God knows what?" I snapped. "Do you honestly think he's doing this for Matthew's future?" But Linda, like always, had her mind made up. "You're just jealous. You're jealous of what Matthew's doing. You've never liked Richard, and now you're blaming him for everything." She stood up, shaking her head, the conversation over in her mind. But I wasn't done. I looked at her, steady and calm, though the rage was bubbling just under the surface. I'm not jealous, Linda. I'm scared, and you should be too, because I've seen this before. I've seen men like Richard ruin people, and now they're doing it to my family, to my grandson. But she wouldn't listen. And Matthew? He was too wrapped up in his own world of promises and false hope to see what was right in front of him. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, I watched more pieces of Matthew's life slip away. He justified everything, selling off investments, emptying out savings, all in the name of growth and opportunity. The more he trusted Richard, the more he lost himself. And the more I watched, the more I felt like I was losing him too. I tried once more, late one night, when Matthew came to visit after one of his meetings with Richard. "Matthew, please, listen to me," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You need to stop. This isn't the way." "Richard," he cut me off, eyes wide with frustration. "Grandma, I know what I'm doing. I'm not some kid anymore. I've got a plan. I'm taking control of my future." "You're being controlled, Matthew," I whispered, "and you don't even see it." But he didn't hear me. He couldn't. And I knew, deep down, that there was nothing more I could say. I was tired of warning them, tired of shouting into the void, hoping someone would listen. No one wanted to hear the truth. Not Linda, not Matthew. So I decided to wait. I would wait for the truth to find its way to the surface, because it always did. The lies always catch up, and when they did, I would be there, watching from the sidelines, ready to see how the story unfolded, the way it always did. And in that silence, I knew one thing for certain. The truth was coming. I just had to be patient. 3 months. Just 3 months. That was how long it took for the perfect illusion to crumble. I had seen it coming, of course. I had felt it in my bones, even before Matthew had started selling his assets and handing his trust over to Richard Carlyle. But it didn't make it any easier when the reality of it hit. The phone call came late one evening, just as the sun was sinking behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the estate. Matthew was sitting in the study, going over some documents, his face lit by the glow of the desk lamp. He looked up when I picked up the phone. His curiosity piqued. I didn't speak at first. I just listened. It was Linda on the other end, and her voice was tight, strained. "Mom, you need to sit down. Brianna, she's filed for divorce." I felt the world pause for a moment. The air seemed to thicken, the weight of the news pressing down on me. Brianna, Matthew's new wife, 3 months, not even long enough for a proper season to change. I stayed silent, my eyes locking with Matthew's, his confusion, his disbelief painted across his face. "What are you talking about?" Matthew's voice cracked, and I saw the panic begin to creep into his eyes. She says it's incompatibility, Matthew." Linda's voice was distant, but I could hear the underlying bitterness. "And she says she wants a separation of assets, including your shares in the Whitmore Company." The words cut through me like a knife. Brianna hadn't just left him. She was taking everything she could with her, and she had the audacity to do it under the guise of a simple divorce. I stood there, my mind racing, piecing the puzzle together. 3 months was nothing. That was no time at all. Not enough time to really know someone, let alone end up with a divorce. But that was the plan, wasn't it? To worm her way in, to charm him, to make him fall, and then pull the rug out from under him when she had everything in her grasp. She had never been in it for love. She'd been in it for the power, for the access to the Whitmore name. I could feel the trap close around me, around all of us. Matthew tried to speak again, but his words were all jumbled. She can't be serious, right? She can't just... But I had seen this story unfold too many times. I had heard the same words, felt the same heartbreak, watched the same naive optimism fall apart. Brianna had never cared about him. She had never cared about the family, about anything but what she could get. I waited a few more seconds, watching the confusion flood his face. Then I made my decision. "Matthew," I said quietly, my voice firm, "there's something you need to know." He looked at me, his eyes searching for some sort of answer, some kind of comfort. "Brianna has a plan. She's been using you from the start." He recoiled, the words striking him harder than I expected. "Grandma, no, that's not..." "I'm not finished," I cut him off. "You're not seeing it. She's been working with Richard and Dylan. They've been pulling the strings, and you've been too blinded by love to see it." His face hardened, the anger replacing confusion. But it was too late. The truth was already out. "She's asking for everything, Matthew. Your shares, the money, everything. And it won't stop there. They'll keep coming for more." He didn't respond. He didn't have the words, but I could see the hurt settling in his eyes, the realization of everything I had been warning him about finally sinking in. I turned away, my heart heavy but resolute. "This isn't over," I muttered to myself. Not yet. Within the next few days, I took action. I couldn't wait for Matthew to figure it out on his own, not after all the warning signs I'd seen. I hired an investigator, someone who specialized in digging through the dirt and uncovering the truth no one wanted to face. I told the investigator to leave no stone unturned. I needed to know everything about Brianna, Richard, and their circle, where they had come from, what they'd been hiding. I needed to know if there was more, if they were working together, or if Brianna had been playing Matthew from the very beginning. It didn't take long for the investigator to find what I already knew in my gut. Brianna's financial history was a mess. Liens, debts, shady dealings, everything I'd suspected. And Richard, the so-called golden boy of the business world, wasn't much better. There were whispers of fraudulent deals, bankruptcies, and shady investments linked to his name. I felt the anger burn inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that they had thought they could get away with it, that they had used my grandson as a pawn to further their own selfish needs. But now, I had them. I had everything I needed to bring them down. The trap was set, and now it was time for them to feel the consequences of their actions. I had no more patience for waiting. It was time to fight back. The pieces started to fall into place faster than I could have imagined. Once the investigator I hired dug into the finances of the Carlyle family, it became clear that their polished facade was nothing more than a brittle shell, ready to shatter with the slightest pressure. The Carlyle family was financially destroyed. And I mean destroyed. Their debts were staggering, mortgages overdue, businesses in jeopardy, judgments piling up like an avalanche ready to bury them all. Brianna, it seemed, wasn't the only one with a history of poor financial decisions. Her father, Richard, had been living a life of expensive illusions, buying into the image of success while neglecting the reality of his bankrupt empire. The investigator didn't stop there, of course. The more he dug, the more unsettling the story became. He found court records detailing lawsuits, liens, and unpaid loans stretching across the last decade. It was as if the Carlises had been running from creditors their entire lives, barely keeping ahead of the tide of their own making. But it wasn't just their money problems that caught my attention. It was something deeper. The connection between Brianna and Dylan began to form clearer lines. I had noticed Dylan during the wedding, of course. He was that charming, almost invisible figure who blended into the background while always staying just a bit too close to Brianna. A family friend, they had called him. But it didn't sit right with me. His behavior, his proximity to Brianna, there was more to their relationship than just friendship. I had felt it in my gut the entire time. The investigator, digging through their connections, began to make the same conclusions. Dylan wasn't just a friend. He had deeper ties to Brianna than anyone had realized. The more the detective uncovered, the clearer it became that Dylan had been part of a plan. And that plan wasn't about love. It was about something much more sinister. A few weeks into the investigation, the detective discovered that Dylan was the owner of a nightclub in a wealthy neighborhood. Not just any place, it was a high-end establishment that catered to the rich and the reckless, the kind of place where the wealthy would come to indulge their darkest desires, paying for privacy and secrecy. This was the moment when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It made perfect sense now. Dylan wasn't just hanging around, offering Brianna a shoulder to lean on. He was working with her. He was working with Richard. And together, they were building a network of deceit and manipulation that went far beyond the simple marriage to Matthew. They were using him as a pawn. I instructed the investigator to go deeper, to look into Dylan's life. I needed to know how far back this web of lies went, what kind of dealings Dylan was involved in, and how it connected to Brianna. The investigator didn't waste any time. He made his way to the nightclub, using his connections to slip in unnoticed. He spent hours there, watching, listening, gathering information. He spoke with a few of the staff members, discreetly asking about Dylan's activities. It didn't take long before one of the employees, a low-level bartender who didn't realize he was being watched, let something slip. For a small fee, the bartender gave up something valuable: access to the security footage from the club. The investigator didn't waste a second. He arranged for the footage to be delivered to him. It arrived a few days later, a black and white reminder of the darkness that had been festering just under the surface of everything I had trusted. I watched the footage in silence. It was a grainy video taken from the security cameras inside the club. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just a few patrons in the background, laughing, dancing, and drinking. Then it came into focus. Brianna, Dylan, alone. The footage showed them in a secluded corner, hidden from the rest of the crowd. They were laughing together, their bodies closer than I had ever seen them at the wedding. Brianna reached out and touched Dylan's arm, and he leaned in, whispering something into her ear that made her laugh. Then, the moment that stopped my heart, Dylan kissed her. It was quick, but it was unmistakable. A kiss that spoke volumes. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly as I processed the footage. This wasn't just some fleeting moment, some innocent gesture. This was something deeper. They were involved, and it was all a part of the plan to tear my family apart. I knew what I had to do. The time for waiting was over. The truth was out there, in black and white, and it was time for me to act. This wasn't just about a bad marriage or a foolish investment. This was about a calculated, deliberate attack on everything I had worked for. And I would make sure that Brianna, Richard, and Dylan paid for it all. I would make them feel the full force of the consequences. Because once the truth came to light, there would be no hiding, no excuses, just the wreckage of their own making. When the footage arrived, I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to see it in full to know what it would reveal. But when I watched it, the undeniable proof of Brianna and Dylan's betrayal, the flood of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, disgust, satisfaction, and even relief. The video began innocuously enough, with a few shots of the club, patrons mingling, drinks flowing, music pulsing through the air. But then it narrowed in on them, Brianna and Dylan, in the corner of the club where no one could see them, where they thought no one was watching. The timestamp flashed at the bottom of the screen, just a week before the wedding. And there they were, in the dimly lit corner, laughing, their bodies close in a way that was far too intimate for a mere friendship. My eyes didn't leave the screen as I saw the moment unfold. Brianna touched Dylan's face, a soft, almost tentative gesture, her fingers grazing the side of his jaw as if they had done it 1,000 times before. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, and the kiss wasn't just a peck. It was deep, it was heated. It was everything I needed to confirm the truth. They pulled away for a second, their eyes locking, and then more whispers, more shared secrets, their hands intertwining like nothing else mattered. A quick, almost furtive touch across her lower back. Brianna's laughter echoed through the quiet, a sound I hadn't heard from her at the wedding, not once. And then, the most damning part of all, they kissed again, this time, longer, with more heat, more intent, more intimacy. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk as the anger bubbled up inside me. I had known it. Every instinct in me had screamed the truth, but now I had it, in black and white, Brianna and Dylan, together, behind Matthew's back. And the worst part? She had been playing him, pretending to be his perfect bride, while she was already building her life with Dylan, stringing Matthew along as part of her grand plan. I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with a twisted satisfaction. Now I had them. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of the discovery. A part of me was repulsed by what Brianna had done to my grandson, to our family. But another part, the one that had been quiet for so long, felt vindicated. The trap had been set, and now it was time to spring it. Now, my girl, I whispered softly to the screen. Now you've made your mistake, and it's the last one you'll make. The video was clear, without room for misinterpretation. Brianna had been unfaithful to Matthew while she was still wearing the wedding ring, and Dylan, that snake, had been a willing accomplice in this treachery. I placed the footage carefully into an envelope, sealed it, and took a deep breath. I had everything I needed now, evidence that would dismantle her claims, expose her lies, and turn the tide in our favor. The wheels were already in motion. Matthew would know the truth, the full, ugly truth, the one that had been hiding beneath Brianna's perfect smile, beneath the promises she'd made. She had believed that she could get away with it. She had believed that she could fool everyone. But now the game had changed, and I was ready to make sure that Brianna and her accomplices would pay for everything they had done. They would not escape this. Not this time. Not. I could feel the tension in my body easing. There was no more doubt, no more waiting. It was time to show Matthew the proof, to force him to see what he had been too blind to recognize. Enough of this charade, I muttered to myself, standing up, feeling the weight of years of experience settle into my shoulders. It's time to put an end to it all. The day I handed the evidence to the family lawyers felt like the quiet before a storm, one I had been waiting to unleash for months. With the footage securely in hand, there was no more holding back. It was time to watch Brianna's carefully constructed world begin to fall apart. Piece by piece, I walked into the law office with purpose, the envelope containing the damning video pressed tightly against my side. The lawyers were already expecting me. They had been briefed, had seen the warning signs long before I'd come to them. But this was the moment that would change everything. I placed the envelope on the desk and slid it toward the head lawyer, a sharp, methodical man named Greg Cartwright, who had worked for the Whitmore family for years. He looked up at me with a raised eyebrow. "Eleanor, I trust you know what's in here?" he asked, his tone almost too casual, though I knew better. I nodded slowly, my gaze fixed firmly on him. "I know exactly what's in there, Greg, and so will Brianna once you play the video for her." His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, pulling out the disc. He didn't need to ask for more details. He knew exactly what he was about to witness. But I saw the moment he realized the full extent of the betrayal, the look in his eyes when he saw the timestamp and the intimacy between Brianna and Dylan, the undeniable evidence that couldn't be explained away. He turned the disc over in his hands before finally speaking. This is bad. This changes everything." I didn't smile, but I felt a deep satisfaction, a quiet vindication that washed over me. The truth was now out. Brianna couldn't deny it. The lies, the manipulation, all of it had been laid bare. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Greg immediately began making calls, working swiftly to prepare the legal response. It didn't take long for the lawyers to begin dismantling Brianna's claims. The divorce wasn't about incompatibility or different life goals. No, it was about betrayal. And betrayal, in the eyes of the law, carried consequences. We countered every move Brianna's attorneys made, with one clear point. She had violated her marital vows with Dylan, and that rendered her claims invalid. The video, dated and time-stamped, was irrefutable proof. No amount of flowery words from her side could change the facts. Soon, the financial ramifications followed. Brianna had been demanding half of everything Matthew owned, but now she was fighting an uphill battle. The claim to his shares in Whitmore Enterprises? Gone. The supposed community property she thought was hers? No longer. But I wasn't done yet. As the legal battle shifted, I made sure we dug deeper into the financial history of Richard Carlisle. I knew his past was tainted, but I had no idea just how much rot there was beneath the surface. Greg's team began uncovering more than just missed payments and bankruptcies. Richard's entire financial network was a tangled mess of failed investments, fraudulent deals, and businesses built on the quicksand of lies. His attempts to con his way into Whitmore's favor had been just one piece of his broader, dangerous game. His ties to the criminal underworld were more than mere whispers. There were real links, documents that tied him to shady dealings, some of which had already been flagged by the authorities. As the investigations progressed, it became clear that Richard was in deep. He had been using Brianna's marriage to Matthew as a front to enter the Whitmore circle, all the while pushing his own disastrous financial schemes onto my grandson. It wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated manipulation. The walls were closing in on Brianna and Richard, and it felt like the entire world was watching. I could almost hear their false smiles cracking under the pressure. I could see it all unfolding in my mind. Brianna, so confident in her plan, watching as it all slipped through her fingers. And Richard, always the loud one, the charming one, the man who thought he could buy his way into anything, now cornered, his empire of lies about to collapse under the weight of his own greed. I sat back in my chair, watching the pieces fall into place. The sound of lawyers speaking, the quiet rustle of paperwork, the soft hum of the air conditioning, all of it felt like a symphony to me. Because I knew this was only the beginning. Brianna had wanted to take everything from us, my family, my legacy, but now She was losing it all. I didn't feel sorry for her, not one bit. She had made her choice. She had chosen to deceive and destroy, and now she was going to see just how far the Whitmore name could reach when pushed too far. I wasn't about to let anyone take what was mine. Not now. Not ever. The moment Matthew came to me, I knew he had reached his breaking point. The look in his eyes, haunted, confused, full of pain, told me everything. The young man who had once been so sure, so eager to prove himself to the world, was now on his knees, staring at the wreckage of his own decisions. The world he had built in his mind, the perfect future with Brianna at his side, had crumbled before him, leaving nothing but dust and shattered illusions. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice shaking. I didn't see it. I didn't see what was happening until it was too late." I didn't say anything at first. I let him speak, let him stumble through his words, through the brokenness. "I was so stupid," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being smart, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't see what was right in front of me." The weight of his words settled in the room, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any words ever could. I stood up slowly, walking over to him, my steps deliberate. I looked at him, really looked at him. My grandson, the boy I had watched grow up, the boy who had always been so eager to take on the world. And now, here he was, defeated by his own naivety. "You weren't stupid, Matthew," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "You were blind." He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "I was blind. To everything. To her. To Richard. To Dylan. I couldn't see it. I didn't listen. I didn't—" "Listen," I interrupted, my voice hardening. "You didn't listen." "No? And now look at the price you're paying." I paused, feeling the weight of every word, every lesson that had led me to this moment. "Amare bonito," I said, my tone softening slightly but still carrying that steel edge. "Mas amar sem enxergar é burrice." The words hung between us like a heavy truth. He flinched as if they were a slap across his face, but there was no anger behind them, only the cold reality of the situation. Matthew had been so caught up in the illusion of love, in the idea of what he thought his life should look like, that he had failed to see the cracks in the foundation. He had trusted the wrong people. He had believed the lies, and now he had to face the consequences of that. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm sorry for everything. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you. You were right all along, Grandma. I was too blind to see it." I nodded slowly, my gaze steady. "You weren't the only one, Matthew. We all wanted to believe in the fairy tale, but sometimes the truth isn't what we want it to be. It's what we need it to be." He looked down, ashamed, his hands trembling. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix what I've done." I sighed deeply, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. "You can't fix it, Matthew. Not all of it. What's broken is broken. But you can learn. You can grow. That's all we can do in life. Learn from the mistakes we make, even if they come at a steep price." He nodded, swallowing hard. I saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of realizing that no matter how much he wished it, he couldn't turn back time. "But you're not alone," I added, my voice gentler now. "The name Whitmore means something. It means strength. It means legacy. And I'll protect that with everything I have. But you, Matthew, you have to protect yourself now. And you have to protect what's left of your family, because that's all we have in the end." He looked up at me then, something flickering in his eyes. Hope, maybe. The realization that there was still a way forward, but only if he could let go of the past, only if he could understand that he wasn't a victim of the circumstances. He had let himself be deceived, and now he had to take responsibility for the mess he had created. "I'll fix it, Grandma," he said, his voice firmer now, though I could hear the weight behind it. "I'll make it right. I swear." I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. He would have to figure it out on his own, just like I had figured it out on my own. The lessons of life were never easy, but they were always necessary. Now, more than ever, I knew that it wasn't just about protecting the Whitmore name. It was about protecting those who still had the chance to learn. And Matthew still had a chance. It would take time, and it would take more strength than he realized. But I believed that if he truly wanted it, he could become the man he was meant to be. Not the man Brianna or Richard had wanted him to be, but the man who could stand on his own, strong, capable, and wise enough to see the truth. And for that, I would fight. The day I began the restructuring of the Whitmore legacy was the day I truly realized how much the world had changed and how much it was still up to me to preserve what had been built. For decades, I had fought to keep this family strong, to hold everything together. But the time had come for a shift, one that would redefine the future of the Whitmore name. I had never believed in blind inheritance. The idea that someone could simply be handed a legacy based on blood alone was not something I subscribed to. It had never been enough for me, and after everything that had happened, I knew it could never be enough for the next generation. So I sat down with the lawyers, the accountants, the advisors who had worked for the Whitmore estate for years, and I gave them the most important task they would ever receive: to change everything. The first thing we did was rewrite the wills, every single one of them. They were no longer about distributing assets or making sure the right amount of wealth trickled down to the right people. No, now they were about something far more valuable. They were about legacy, character, and the wisdom that comes with experience. I wanted to make sure that whoever stood to inherit the Whitmore name, the empire I had fought so hard to build, had earned it, truly earned it. No more handing out power to the unworthy. No more giving the next generation a free pass because of their birthright. I had seen too many people like Brianna, too many people who believed that legacy was a title, a name, or a bank account. They thought that they could take what was rightfully someone else's and make it their own, without understanding the responsibility that came with it. Brianna had thought she could manipulate her way into the family, take what she wanted, and walk away with a piece of what I had worked so hard to protect. And then there was Matthew, my grandson. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Love isn't enough. Loyalty and wisdom, those were the things that mattered. And they had to be proven. So we made the changes, I knew there would be resistance. I knew that Matthew might struggle with the idea that the world he had imagined for himself, one where everything was given to him on a silver platter, was over. But it was a necessary evolution. I couldn't let the Whitmore name fall into the wrong hands. Not after all the years of sweat, blood, and sacrifice. The new rules were simple, but they were harsh. Anyone who wanted to inherit the Whitmore name, the empire, would have to prove 3 things: character, loyalty, and wisdom. Character, the foundation of everything. Without integrity, there was no future. Loyalty, to the family, to the legacy. If you didn't understand that, you didn't belong. Wisdom, you couldn't lead if you didn't understand the weight of responsibility that came with power. You had to be capable of seeing the bigger picture, making decisions not just for yourself, but for the future of the family and the empire. I knew Matthew would have to prove himself. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He would have to show me that he had learned from his mistakes, that he wasn't just a fool in love, blindly following someone who had used him, that he understood the value of trust and responsibility. And if Brianna thought she was still in the running, if she thought she could somehow worm her way back into the fold after everything that had happened, she was sorely mistaken. The rules had changed, and she didn't fit into the future I was building. I wasn't doing this to punish anyone. I wasn't doing this to make life harder for Matthew, for Linda, or for anyone else. I was doing it because the Whitmore legacy meant something. It meant something more than wealth, more than status. It was about responsibility. It was about building something that would stand the test of time. If you didn't have the strength to carry that weight, then you didn't deserve it. After everything that had happened with Brianna, I was more determined than ever to ensure that the Whitmore name would endure. I would pass it on, but only to those who deserved it. The restructuring was complete. The documents were signed, the new rules in place. I sat in my office that evening, looking out over the estate, feeling the weight of the decision I had made. I knew it would be hard. I knew that it would be uncomfortable for some, especially for Matthew. But in my heart, I knew it was the right thing to do. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the future of the Whitmore legacy. And that, my dear, would never be something I handed out easily. Now, I muttered to myself, it's time for them to prove themselves. The day I called the family together, I knew it would be the final turning point. The changes had been made, the rules had been set, and there would be no turning back. I had spent my entire life building something worth keeping, something worth fighting for, and I would not let it crumble under the weight of a few misplaced trust and misguided hearts. I'd summoned Matthew, Linda, and the key members of the Whitmore family to my office. It was an intimate gathering, no crowd, no spectacle, just the people who mattered, the ones who had stood by me or who had still to prove themselves. As they gathered around the long polished table, I could see the nervous energy in the air. There were questions, of course, doubts, but I wasn't here to explain myself. I wasn't here to hold anyone's hand or soften the blow. "Sit," I said quietly, as I took my place at the head of the table. My voice carried, calm and unyielding, and it didn't take much for them to fall silent. They had learned long ago that when Eleanor Whitmore spoke, it wasn't with the expectation of a debate, it was a command. Matthew looked at me, his face still raw from the betrayal, from his own realization of how far he had fallen. I saw the guilt in his eyes, the pain of knowing that everything he had built in his mind was a lie. Linda sat beside him, her expression tight, like a woman holding on to the last shred of control she had left. "I'm sure you all have questions," I began, my eyes sweeping across the room. "But this isn't a conversation. It's a declaration." I paused for a moment, making sure every one of them was listening, really listening. The Whitmore name, the empire, this legacy, it's not something you inherit by virtue of birth or because you were born into the right family. It's earned, every single piece of it. You don't ask for it. You prove you deserve it. I let that sink in, the weight of my words pressing into the room like the thick silence between them. There have been changes made. The rules have been rewritten. No more giving away what is mine to those who haven't proven they can carry the weight. Matthew shifted slightly, but I didn't let him speak. Not yet. "You will prove your worth in ways that matter. Character, loyalty, wisdom. Those are the only qualities that matter now. The rest," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife, "is meaningless." Linda's eyes flickered with confusion, then anger, but she stayed quiet. She didn't understand yet. She wouldn't, not until she saw what came next. "Those of you who cannot meet these standards, who do not understand what it means to carry the Whitmore name with honor, will be left behind. You will have nothing. No second chances. No, 'Oh, we made a mistake. This is not a game.'" I saw Matthew's gaze fall, a mix of shame and determination in his eyes. He understood what I was saying. For all the mistakes he had made, for all the pain he had caused, this was his chance. A final chance. A final... "Make no mistake," I continued, locking eyes with each one of them in turn. "This family will survive because it is built on strength and integrity, not because of pity or because we feel sorry for someone who doesn't want to step up." I leaned forward, my voice lowering, but growing even more intense. "Nome e herança se conquistam, não se pedem. Quem não souber carregar essa responsabilidade, que carregue sua própria cruz." The words echoed in the room, each one settling like a weight in the silence that followed. There would be no excuses. There would be no room for failure, not anymore. If they wanted the legacy, they had to show they were worthy of it. No one would be handed anything, not while I still drew breath. I stood up, my back straight, my head held high. "I've fought too hard for this family, for this name, for everything that we have," I said, my voice unwavering. "I've spent my life protecting it, building it, and I'll be damned if I let it be destroyed by the likes of anyone who doesn't understand what it means to be part of this." I looked at each of them one last time, the weight of the years, the struggles, the betrayals, all written on my face. I had lived through it all, and I had come out stronger. And now, it was their turn. "Do what you will with this," I said coldly. "But remember, I don't have time for anyone who can't carry this responsibility. If you can't, then you are not worthy of the Whitmore name." Without another word, I turned and left the room. My footsteps were deliberate, echoing down the hall like a final verdict. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I walked away, I felt the weight of my age, the years that had piled up behind me. But it wasn't a burden. It was a shield, forged in the fire of all that I had fought for. I had won, again, and I would carry the Whitmore name, as I always had, with honor. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.